Cool. So I think we're going to kick off. My colleague Kate is letting people into the room, and she's also going to be moderating the chat. So yeah, first of all, again, thanks so much, Anna and Eileen, for joining us today. And yeah, hopefully we'll have a great chat, learn a bit more about Aisteach, and yeah, just kind of like I said to you already, I suppose both good things and challenges that might be happening in the LGBT community in Ireland and Dublin as well. So my name is Michaela. I work with Co-operative Housing. So welcome everyone. I know we have CHI members here, colleagues, then we also have people who may have found us through the Pride Guide, and yeah, friends and colleagues and other people from our network. So thanks again for coming along. Going to admit another person. So yeah, listen, we'll start off with introductions. Eileen is the chair of Aisteach Management Committee, and Anna is the chair of the National LGBT Federation. So Eileen, if you want to tell us a bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Okay, so I'm chair, like you said, of the Aisteach Housing Co-operative Committee. We have a management committee, and just, you know, for everyone to be aware, Aisteach is the Irish word for queer. It also means fabulous, weird, wonderful, and otherworldly, or something like that. So that's the reason that we chose it. Also because it has the word "choc" in, which is house, and it's the root of the verb ashling for dream, and we're thinking dream house, you know, queer dream house is what we're aiming towards. We set up a few years ago. Originally we were called Queer Housing Co-op, and we were putting together a group. We had a public meeting in January 2020, but then COVID happened just as we were starting to get going, and so we kind of reconvened over COVID, registered as an Industrial and Providence Society, formerly as a co-op, and set up our kind of values and principles. We started work on our strategy as well. And then earlier this year, we had another public meeting where we opened for membership. So that's kind of where we're at the moment.
That's great. Thanks so much, Eileen. Sorry, I really got ahead of myself there, and I was like, let's get into the chat. And Kate kindly reminded me. So for anyone who's attending the event, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat throughout. And Kate will be moderating, maybe picking out a few for our Q&A towards the end of the session. And yeah, I mean, we kind of, like we were all discussing when we met previously, just, you know, we'd like people, everyone comes with different levels of knowledge, right? So we'd like people to, you know, leave with thoughts and questions and start conversations in their own spheres after it. But thanks so much for the amazing introduction, Eileen, and for explaining a little bit about Aisteach. I actually didn't know that it came from Aisling, like dream, and I love that so much. I'm like, I want to see a generation of children called Aisteach now, which is terrible, but like, I think it would be a nice kind of like, yeah, continuation from Aisling anyway. And Anna, thanks again for joining us. If you want to tell us a bit about yourself and the work you do with the National LGBT Federation, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'm the chair of the National LGBT Federation, also known as the NXF, and I've been in that position since January. And previous to that, I was on the board of the NXF, so I pretty much worked just with GCN and the team there at Gay Community News, which is Ireland's queer media outlet. So I'm pretty new to the role, but the NXF has been around for 40 years and has been involved in all the big moments in the journey for LGBTQ plus people. So they do work with GCN. They run the big event, the galas, which is the Gay and Lesbian Awards, which are happening on October the 7th. We are also involved in advocacy, in the archiving work of the queer community in Ireland. Research and education are the main areas we work in.
Great, thanks so much. I suppose you were saying like GCN have been involved, you know, for the last 40 years in kind of LGBTQ plus events, yeah. And we're kind of we're chatting about how bananas, absolutely bananas it is that being gay, being homosexual was decriminalized only 30 years ago. And it seems like we've made like massive strides in that time, but then also there are challenges as well. Do either of you want to kind of give, I suppose, a bit around maybe the good things that are happening in the community in Ireland, and then possibly some of the challenges as well currently?
Yeah. Eileen, do you want to start?
I was kind of leaving it to you. Well, I mean, there's loads of great things. Obviously, we're you know, we've got we have marriage equality, and we have gender recognition. We have a number of different things, which I think, you know, the list of them probably Anna might know better. But there are still challenges, and that's the important thing. And we've seen recently there's a real rise in hate crime towards LGBT people. There's an awful lot of, you know, I suppose I'm particularly concerned with housing. So, you know, of real concern to myself and the others involved in Aisteach is the fact that more and more queer people are leaving the city and even leaving the country because of the problem with accommodation. And I would have come out in the 1980s when everyone was emigrating from this country, and the community was so small and so fragmented. You could see how hard it was to you know, stay connected, or you know, the difference now to have this thriving community. That's my main reason for being involved in the housing co-op, is to try and hold on to that community in the urban centre, because that's, you know, generally speaking, it contributes to the city, but it's also where gay people come to find their people. And Anna, you might talk more about challenges that you know, or good things too.
Yeah, I'll start with the good things. So recently when I was talking at the Aisteach event, and we were focusing on Dublin because that's where it's going to happen. And you know, I came out in 91, 92, and certainly the lesbian scene had a real underground feel, and you know, socializing was in these kind of lounge areas of bars, not even in the main bar. You know, you'd be asking the bar manager to give you a little room upstairs, and there'd be, you know, people kind of gathering up there, and you hope it would happen some weekend and it mightn't happen another weekend. So it was very sort of undergroundy. And so when I came out, that was 2 years before decriminalization. And then this, I suppose, massive, it took a long time, but this massive journey happened to up until 2015, you know, as Eileen was talking about, with the marriage referendum, which was an incredible moment in time for the queer community and for Ireland in general. And then since then, and especially, so staying on the positives, and looking at, I suppose, how Dublin has changed, the amount of support services that are there with different organizations like Belong To and Shout Out, the amount of social areas that people can go with the bars and clubs, the amount of sporting groups that are out there. So I think the queer community is very visible at the moment, but with visibility and kind of exposing yourself, it leaves you vulnerable to the backlash that is happening at the moment. So just in a recent report from ILGA Europe, it found that 2022 was the most violent year in Europe in over a decade for LGBTQ plus people. And we're seeing this here in Ireland. The recent examples of what happened in the library in Swords in Dublin, a very small example, but kind of a horrible example. There's an increase in homophobic, biphobic and transphobic attacks. And then the other area where it's toxic is online, and what people from the queer community have to deal with, especially transphobia and people who are trans and intersex people as well. So there's just this feeling within the community that there's a definite threat there, and that's on the rise. And I think we're all feeling that.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I suppose when it comes to like we can't really ask like how do we fix these things, but what kind of moves can we make, you know, in order to protect community spaces for queer people, and then, you know, people who may be straight allies as well, like how can they protect without maybe infiltrating or taking over? I know that's a huge question, but if you both have any thoughts on it, you know, how can we make these, how can we make things safer and more inclusive?
Well, Eileen, you might want to talk about that in a housing, housing way. But I was at the Dublin Pride launch recently, and everybody was just talking about the rise of the impact from the far right, and I think it's simply about standing up, demonstrating, getting out there, lobbying, talking to your politicians, and everybody across the board doing that, not just people from the LGBTQ plus community, but allies as well, you know, just not letting this slide, because the far right have found the cracks and they're really kind of finding their way in, and there's huge funding as well that they're getting. So I think it's just about showing up and demonstrating and being really vocal in support for the queer community, you know. And that happened in a small, not in a small way, that happened in Navan, you know, with that horrendous attack. It was a horrendous homophobic attack, but the community got involved and the allies got involved. So it's happening, you know, but it needs to continue to happen.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's, you know, that would be brilliant to see more people standing up and coming out. And then we also see things like, you know, I know it's in schools, but they bring in Belong To for the stand-up awareness weeks, and also Shout Out who do training. But then in workplaces as well, there's, you know, training and equality and diversity teams, and there's training from similar, pink training they call it, or purple training. But I think in terms of housing, it's, you know, home is where we really need to feel safe. And when people feel threatened around their home, it has a real impact on them in a way that we just can't even, you know, imagine or describe when we're securely housed, because it makes people so vulnerable. And to feel, you know, threatened in their neighborhood or in their home or in their housing, you know, units or whatever way you want to call them, it's really important to address any issues that arise and to address them early, and to, you know, for housing associations or housing bodies to have clear policies. I think an important thing is education around the issues and not being afraid to ask LGBT people, you know, like sometimes if someone is trans or non-binary, you know, not being afraid. That's something I had to learn, actually, is not to be afraid to ask, well, what pronouns do you use, or even using pronouns ourselves. It just makes people feel more comfortable. And it's a really small, simple thing, but it is a sort of a signal of solidarity to that person as well. And then I you know, I'm sure, you know, there's a range of different approaches that you can take, but there's a lot of community organizations out there doing an awful lot of work. One thing that you know, a young homeless trans person said to me recently was about there not being dedicated officers within local authorities dealing, you know, or within homeless services who are specifically there to deal with equality and diversity and to deal with some of these issues. And I think that's something that, you know, could be, you know, worked on, you know, across the board. So if you have a homeless service, they treat everyone the same. They don't acknowledge or recognize that maybe trans or LGBT people, or, you know, people from a broad range of things might have different needs and might need different supports. And so that's another thing that people could address. But I'm sure there's, you know, there's lists and lists of issues like that.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of housing, I was at a youth housing kind of forum recently, and they were talking about the needs of young people who might be in emergency accommodation. And then you're kind of, and how it might, it's just, I suppose, inappropriate, you know, for young people who might be in with other kind of service users, and it's probably the same if you're coming from the queer community. There's that again an added safety issue. So I suppose yeah, I know we kind of touched on younger people just there, but how do the housing needs of LGBTQ plus people differ then? I know there's a safety concern, you've mentioned that. Is there anything else? The sense of community as well is really important. You know, is there anything else that comes to mind when you think about queer people and the housing and suitable, the ideal, right? You know, you said the dream house. What is the ideal then in terms of, yeah.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, when you know, if you're looking at housing needs of LGBT people, most of the research seems to focus on young LGBT people and older LGBTQIA people, and it's sort of recognised that there's a higher risk of homelessness among young LGBT people, and usually that is because there might be some family conflict, they mightn't feel comfortable where they live, and it's you know, they feel safer in actual fact making themselves homeless. I think another important thing is to go back to what I said at the beginning about the city. And a lot of young people will be looking to find their identity, and they might, you know, I think we've all been there, that we're not 100% clear who we are until we find other people like us. So a lot of you know, there's not that much research in that in Ireland, but we do find in other countries that a lot of young people, LGBT in particular, will move to a city or move to urban centres to find that sense of belonging and to find other people like them. So that's another reason to be more at risk of homelessness. I think within Ireland, there's an awful lot of invisible homelessness among young LGBT people that we, you know, because there does tend to be, you know, if you go to the services or you try to access supports out in the mainstream, and you don't have a really good reason to leave home, and you know, sometimes that idea of identity doesn't seem like a good reason, or your parents not supporting your gender identity or your sexual identity, that would not seem to, particularly as we're in a housing crisis. But for some young LGBT people, they will sleep on the streets, or what seems to be happening a lot is maybe in squats with other queer people. And just not register with services. Now, whether that's true about the services or not, but that is the perception, you know, among those groups. And then for older LGBT people, what has been identified is that older LGBT people are less likely to access services, and that's across the board, whether that's health or, you know, social welfare, or, you know, support services that are out there, including housing. And that's from having, you know, grown up or lived their lives in a society in which they weren't accepted. So even though we know that our society is not like that anymore, we still have that instinct, you know, and whether we even think it through, it's just we've set up this habit of not looking for help. And that becomes a real problem for older people as they get older. They become very isolated and, you know, maybe suffer from, you know, an awful lot of related things, you know, mental health or you know, even health problems, because they're not accessing the services earlier enough. And in some cases, you know, older people might have moved back to Ireland that don't have the networks, and, you know, maybe estranged from their families as well. So they don't have what we see, you know, what we have in Ireland is we've an awful lot of invisible care going on through families and through supportive networks of friends, etc., etc. So that's that. But I believe myself that there is and more and more people in the middle that is not being addressed by research. And those, I think, because of all those positive things that we've talked about, which means that it's more acceptable here to be gay, and it's more, you know, and it's easier for people to identify with queer people and then start questioning their own, maybe, you know, in previous years, somebody might not have come out at all, but there's more people coming out in you know, middle years, or, you know, not just as young teenagers or whatever. And that's one thing that means, you know, that can have an impact as well on the housing situation. And then another one is, you know, more people are moving to Ireland because we are one of the countries that is accepting of LGBT people. So there's a lot of people feeling fleeing, sorry, persecution on the basis of their gender or their gender identity or their sexuality. And so that's another group of people in the middle that we're not really taking into account. So there's, it's very broad and it's very wide ranging. And then the housing needs then, I mean, we all know Ireland, in Ireland, our conception of a house is very much, based on the straight model and, what we call heteronormative ideas. So that's just a given. It's just, we don't even think about it. We don't even question it. And because we've been in one housing crisis after the other, practically all my life, I've seen housing crisis, even though this one is particularly, severe, but it doesn't mean we've just never addressed the housing needs of Irish people. It's nearly always, back to everyone's ideal is their own front door and the garden fence and the 3 bedrooms for the 2.5 children, which doesn't, society
I
as
saw
a whole.
3-bed semi-D flat up in my head when you said that,
exactly.
Yeah.
Just add a couple of more points to what Eileen was saying, and this is again from the ILGA report, that an above average number of LGBTQ plus people are in uncertain employment, which often leads to housing instability, with trans and intersex people experiencing even higher rates of socioeconomic exclusion than cisgender, non-trans, lesbian, gay and bisexual people. And this is very often due to discrimination in education, access to the labour market, and discrimination in the labour market, a discrimination which persists in other areas of life that increase LGBTI people's risk of falling below the poverty line, such as access to housing. And something else that I was speaking about recently is kind of historically queer people occupy a lot of roles in the creative world and in community sectors. And these might not be the best paid jobs, but that they're the jobs in Dublin and they're the jobs, that they want to work in. And of course, it just kind of rules them out of most of the accommodation that's available at the moment in Dublin.
Yeah, if you have some kind of income precarity on top of maybe then other barriers, yeah, it definitely would. Yeah, it's all really interesting. I suppose in terms of Aisteach and what you'd like to achieve as a housing club, like what would be, what kind of projects are you working towards? Would you focus on, I know you said before that maybe kind of more communal living would be suitable for younger queer people, but maybe for older queer people, but even in the middle, like you mentioned, it mightn't be as suitable. I know myself, I'm going into my 30s. I don't really want to live with other people, that kind of way. I think we all kind of, the older you get, the more you want your own space. Like what would be the starting point then for having cooperative living in Dublin? Again, be as idealistic or
at the moment, we're still looking at models, but, generally the consensus has been that we would look for each, for, a housing project that has a number of different households in it. So it's not a case that it would be communal living, really. I haven't found that all that many people in favor of that. There's one, there might be a couple, but like generally speaking, it's self-contained apartments or housing within a safe space. I think a safe space is has come up as to be very important, and definitely intergenerational. I think the intergenerational piece is the more and more we think about it is really important. I mean, for one thing, that we don't want it to be just for younger, we see it in Dublin at the moment, all the student housing, young people being ghettoized into one type of housing, older people into another. Like I was saying earlier, the queer community has been so important for people coming out, and for younger people, part of that is finding, their elders, and you've got to remember that nearly every person is born into a straight family. So they find their family within the community. So there's enough, it's really, really important for queer people, and it's important for everyone. Of course, we know community is important for every group, but it has a particular resonance for queer people for that reason. And then for older people as well, to stay connected into their community and to stay feeling involved and feeling useful as well, but mostly connected, and and people in the middle as well, so that there isn't that ghettoization and that separation out. Oh, you've got particular needs, you're in this group and that, because it's our way of thriving and of sustaining ourselves into the future. Otherwise, every generation that comes out has to reinvent the wheel, and we'd be back to kind of refighting the fight for marriage equality, or for legalization again, or whatever it might be. And I think even if there are a lot of LGBT people leaving the city and moving out to rural areas, or small towns or whatever, we still need that strong sense of an urban centre, because that's where the services are, and those people, no matter where they live, particularly Ireland being such a small country, you need that reassurance that you have an urban centre that you can go to when you need, or that you can visit, or that you can fall. And also for people visiting this country, whether moving here or whether just visiting as tourists, a lot of people do come to Dublin to access their queer community, whether that's just visiting or planning on moving. So.
And Eileen, I just in relation to intergenerational, would I be right in thinking that happens quite naturally within the queer community? Queer people mix with all sorts of ages, and we have friends 20, 30 years older and younger than ourselves. So would you think that's...
I think that's very, I that's certainly been my experience, and that's something that I just really don't, personally don't want to see being lost. But I think it's really important in terms of supporting each other, and being able to draw on the kind of wealth of knowledge of older people, but also the energy and enthusiasm of younger people, and then for everyone in between. And like more and more LGBT people are starting to have families now, and think of families, and the idea of being somewhere safe, it does depend on having that strong sense of community, and I think having that range of ages, but also for people moving here as well, like I said, for migrant communities as well. A lot of people would be moving to Ireland because of persecution based on their gender, and we're looking at models of actually designing in that sort of safe space in from the beginning, and it goes across everything from our language, our values, our system, how we interact with each other, stuff around, say, conflict resolution, how we manage that, to think about those things right at the beginning. We haven't even got any funding yet, or we haven't even come up with how, what kind of housing we're going to provide. But we're still sort of thinking of that kind of the foundations of those sort of community values to build on, rather than think of it as being when we're thinking about what kind of housing, it isn't just a physical thing, if you know what I mean.
Of course, yeah. Thanks so much both. Just to remind everyone who's watching, just if you want to enter any questions to ask Eileen or Anna into the chat, we'll have a Q&A session in about 10-15 minutes with the audience questions. And yeah, I mean, in terms of, Eileen, you were saying, the values are really important. Is that part of the reason why Aisteach is a cooperative instead of just being maybe a regular housing association or housing body? Was that kind of the thinking behind it, creating maybe a manifesto or bringing people together with values? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, I think one of the main things is we really committed to the idea of it being in community ownership, and that it isn't. I know that traditionally the housing cooperatives in Ireland have tended to be, building cooperatives or social housing, but we wanted to maintain something in community ownership, and have it that it's not for profit, so that people are living in a cooperative, have a right of residence there, but don't actually end up then buying out a property and selling it off, so that it remains a queer community, sustainable, long-term sustainability. Now, it's proven a real challenge because there haven't been many models that have approached delivering housing this way, but we're still sort of working on teasing out how to actually go about that. So if anyone here has any advice or wants to get involved and wants to support us in any way, I do a shout out now for that. Like, yeah, please step in. And then I suppose the other thing is that the cooperative principles, you know, really appeal to us. It's, you know, that whole idea of one member, one vote, that those kind of democratic principles, self-help, and then supporting other cooperatives as well. And it just seems to be you know, a good way to provide, you know, to provide housing, to provide ourselves and to work ourselves on developing a solution to the housing crisis. I suppose that's another thing that we talked about a lot, is how a lot of Irish people and queer people as well have become so disempowered around housing and are looking for some sort of, you know, all-powerful entity outside of ourselves as people to come along and solve that problem. And you know, as we can see, that's not, you know, that's not really working. You know, we need to start thinking about it ourselves and thinking about how we want, what we want to do moving forward. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the basis of taking the approach of cooperative.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, it's very holistic, isn't it? You know, I think just in terms of obviously providing housing and housing security and safety for queer people, but then also in terms of like long-term sustainability in, yeah, a very uncertain future in terms of like the environment and the economy and that kind of thing as well. It's, yeah, it's nice to say that like we can take that power into our own hands and, you know, create something together, build something together. Yeah, lovely. I know you said that there aren't many housing cooperatives, like, or queer housing cooperatives, but was there any like particular inspiration, you know, that you saw overseas with a housing body or even just a country that does it well? Like, I know Sweden has a long history of housing cooperatives and, you know, would have like pretty strong values, and it's very yeah, I mean, it's very much part of the culture and the fabric of society. They're living in a housing cooperative. Was there anything that kind of sparked or helped then when you were coming together?
Yeah, we looked at a few and we're continuing to look at some. So you know, Switzerland has also got a lot of housing co-ops, Vienna as well, but I think a lot of them would have been in the UK. You know, a lot of the ones that we would have, for obvious reasons, you know, language, have been able to connect better. So we talked to a group in Leeds. I can't, you know, they've changed the name recently, and I think it's Pride Cooperative, and they're doing a community centre and housing cooperative as well. And then we also looked at there's Tonic Housing in the UK. We've also spoken to a group setting up in Belfast, Belfast Housing Cooperative, you know, who've kind of, you know, cooperated with us a lot as well. I suppose that's the principle. But I think, except for that, Tonic Housing is for LGBT people, but it's for older people. And then that Leeds model seems to be the closest to what we're trying to achieve, because it's mixed tenure, intergenerational, and trying to get that community sense, whereas the Tonic Housing one is mostly private, I think. And you know, but you know, it's based in London, and it's such a much bigger city, whereas we're so small that we, you know, we didn't want to go down a route of just serving one part of the community and not being, you know, totally inclusive and open and welcoming and safe for everyone in the community, which is, you know, it has turned out to be very important to everyone that we ask.
You know, when you say, I'm just throwing questions at you, Eileen. You know, when you say safe, that's really interesting. And is it, how do you see that, or what are people's concerns when they're talking about safety? You know, is it that you're not too removed from the community? You know, it's not barriers that's making you safe. You know, how I suppose, what are people's concerns about safety in a co-op?
And I think one of the big things is security. Housing security is a big thing, you know, and I know that, you know, doesn't seem, you know, when you talk about safety, you're thinking probably more about being under attack or whatever. But also there's a lot of basic things like safer transgender populations where they might feel they're, you know, the possibility of being under attack near their home which has happened and continues to happen, so that they would have a sense that they have a community to back them up, but also that there's a number of there's different pieces of work. Now, I'm not an architect or an engineer, so I can't go into this, but I do know that there's piece of work being done around designing safe spaces. So that comes in from the very beginning. And it's sort of like the principles of universal design, so that you work that in at the beginning. So it isn't just about being accessible. Universal design, of course, is all about being accessible, and that's something that we would, particularly, as we're talking about younger to older, but there would also be the idea of building in designing for safety right from the beginning. I'm not 100% sure how to say that would look, but definitely not gated communities. I mean, we see a lot of that. Like, I think there's a real willingness to be open and welcoming, and try and have community space, not just internally, but for the wider community as well, and connect with the city, but keep that element of safety too.
Yeah, I was reading, that's really interesting, Anna. That was a great question. I was reading something recently actually about one of our estates, and I can't remember the exact name of it. My mind has gone blank, but it's basically this design principle that allows the people who live in the houses to kind of regulate, like they can see every single entrance, and they can see the walkways, they can see the play areas. So it's very like open and like communal. It's bringing like that Dutch kind of no curtains, everyone can see out principle to mind, but like that's nearly one. But it's amazing, like there's probably great scope for innovation then in that area of like, I think if we were architects and we were to sit down and say like, how can we make this like safe and interesting and creative in that sense, without, like Anna, you were saying, putting up barriers, because nobody wants to live in a gated community like, in Dublin. It just, so that's definitely something interesting to keep an eye on and look at it in the future, I suppose. Just to encourage anyone who has questions to pop them into the chat. So I'm just having a look now. There's nothing there at the moment. Do you have anything in particular you'd like to say or touch on? Apologies, my mind's kind of gone blank.
I know that we did want to put the call out to people to get involved. We have a website, it's just aisteach.ie, and in that you can get in touch with us. We've opened up to membership, like I said. Now, a lot of people will kind of go, oh, well, I'm already housed, or I'm not interested in living in the city, or, I'm not interested in living in a co-op. But we're really trying to encourage people in the community to become members, so that it remains in community ownership, that it isn't just about being looking for housing or looking to live in the co-op eventually. Like I said, we haven't got there yet. We're still in development, but definitely we want that sense of community ownership, and as many people in the community to sign up for membership as well. And we also are looking for volunteers, of course. So anyone with housing expert, or any kind of not just expertise, willingness to get involved and learn a little bit and help out and share skills would be brilliant. And then other than that, I think it's sort of like the whole idea of trying to build that sense of people acting themselves around housing issues. So we're focusing on a queer community, and of course housing affects everyone, and there's loads of different communities under the housing crisis is really hurting everyone really across the board, and not just in Dublin, across the country as well. But it would, what we would love to do is to see this project being successful and have it as a model for other groups and other communities to follow. And I mean, it's probably, some people might sort of say, well, why LGBT people? Why not just, the mainstream population? But I think one of the reasons for us anyway, and sorry if I'm going on a little bit, you can cut me off, but one of the things for us that we felt was important to note is that we are a ready-made community. We've proven ourselves over the years, like I said, that we have kind of strong community networks, strong you know, ways of bonding together as a community, that it sort of seems to be a no-brainer that it would be easy to develop some kind of community housing, or cooperative housing, or just community-based ideas around housing within the queer community, because we already have an awful lot of the infrastructure there already. But it is something that could apply, well, I would hope anyway, to any different group.
That's, yeah, amazing. And that just is the whole principle of cooperation between cooperatives, right? Like seeing this will be, you know, the pilot, and hopefully, yeah, it will serve for other communities as well. Yeah, amazing. There's some questions in the chat. So there is one. So the first one I can see there is from Darren. Oh, I feel like yeah, like, I can't find this. Hi, I'm currently involved in setting up student housing cooperative in Cork City. I was wondering what elements could one implement to ensure inclusivity in a co-op when establishing constitution rules. Any thoughts?
I suppose that's back to me again. I know that we agonize, like it took us maybe a year and a half. Like we had, you know, the model rules for a co-op, but to go over them and make sure that they were inclusive, and hopefully they are. So, you know, the actual legislation around cooperatives is really old-fashioned. I'm sure you know, anyone here that's involved in cooperatives would know that, because it's from the late 1800s or whatever. And so we had to go over that language, and you know, it would have been all sort of very old-fashioned patriarchal type of stuff, and then make it more inclusive and use either non-gendered or, you know, different gendered pronouns, etc., etc. But I suppose after that is kind of having an understanding of what your, you know, what inclusivity is and what your values are, and sort of maybe starting from the place of what our values are. I see Liz is on the call here, and she did, you know, some work with us at the time in helping us to define what our values were and set them out. And it really was a lot around that idea of inclusivity and making sure that we were welcoming and open to everyone. So I think it's probably good to start from that, but talk to other housing co-ops as well, and other organizations and other you know, different community groups, to see how they approach that. It's not, you know, it doesn't all just come from the cooperative movement. You know, that idea of inclusivity is across the board, you know, a lot of different organizations.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. That's a great starting point. I think that's something we should use for to start many things in life, inclusivity. And then also, yeah, just that backwards and forwards, right? It's about dialogue, it's about testing, figuring out what people would like to put in there and whatnot. So yeah, looking at Liz's question, I don't know, maybe if Liz wants to unmute themselves, and or I can read it out. I think we can all see it in the chat anyway. I don't know if you're there, Liz. I have a question about safe spaces for women, lifelong lesbians growing older who have reason to fear attacks from young men. Straight usually. I know that's something I continue to fear as I grow older, given the numbers of murdered older women. Of course, I dread being called transphobic, and not saying trans people get attacked too. I heard one mention of lesbian. I support Aisteach totally. I want to see much more safe community-based spaces that are intergenerational. I think it's a really interesting question. It was actually something that came up when Kate and I were thinking about questions, right? Because the LGBTQ plus community is huge, and every group within that has varying needs and varying maybe, yeah, levels of kind of bias or prejudice that they're up against. Like, how do you unite so many people with also that have similar needs, and something that unites them together, but also may have separate ones? I don't know if I'm just waffling there. Anna, Eileen, you might want to
I think just what Eileen was saying, if you just discuss what your core values are, you know, and you come to a place that you're all at ease with, you know. And if someone's not willing to join in that conversation, they probably shouldn't be, you know, involved in the group if they're not willing to discuss core values. I don't know. What do you think, Eileen?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that there is, you know, almost something I've been seeing more and more and reading about more and more is this fear of being called transphobic. And so people aren't prepared to ask, you know, to talk to someone who is trans about their transness. And then also, you know, I think there's, well, the idea that you know, of lesbians being more fearful or more at risk, that's definitely a case that women can't. And what you know, at the beginning there, when I talked about home and home being somewhere where you need to feel safe, more women are attacked and killed in their home than you know, anywhere else. So it you know, for women it has a particular resonance as well, and for lesbians you know, that would definitely apply. But I do think that it's not a case that it's, you know, lesbian against trans, or trans people are getting more attention for attacks, or you know, who's more at risk here. It's just different kinds of risks for different kinds of people. And I suppose that, you know, ultimately, you know, homophobia is not, you know, this, and safety isn't just about physical attack as well. There are lots of other things, you know, being excluded, being frozen out, not feeling that you belong in the community where you live. And you know, I was talking earlier about accessing services or connecting in with local groups, and they're the kind of networks of support, particularly as you age. So it isn't just a, you know, I don't want to characterize us all, you know, and I recognize that some people have very definite fears, and fears based on their own experience and evidence as well. But there's also a lot of us who have fears that are kind of a bit more nebulous and a bit harder to express. And it can be around about, you know, about having those supports, particularly as we get older. So all of those things are really, really important. And it's, you know, trying to make sure that we're developing a space that, you know, everyone can feel safe in. I know one of the things that we looked at was Safe Ireland have developed guidelines for domestic shelters. And, you know, I'm not talking, or we in Aisteach, I should say, aren't talking about, you know, a domestic shelter, but those guidelines are really, really useful when you're looking at trying to make a space that people feel safe in. And it should probably apply to everywhere. Do you know what I mean? It isn't just for when people, you know, have a particular vulnerability or a particular risk. Anyway, I hope that answers that. I kind of might have waffled a little bit.
Oh no, I think that's really interesting. Yeah, Anna, do you have anything to?
No, that was perfect.
Yeah, I think that's great. And thanks, Liz, for the question. Where are we? Yeah, so Kath is asking, is Aisteach looking to become a regulated, approved housing body, similar to cooperative housing or others? Yeah.
At the moment, we're not. Like, we're made up of volunteers, and we really don't have the capacity. Like, you know, I suppose our aim at the moment is to partner with an approved housing body, so that, you know, who'd have the capacity to you know, move the project along, because we know, you know, we won't access all of that know-how. And like I said, you know, at the moment we're all volunteers, you know, most of us either working or studying full time and trying to do this in our spare time. So and there are approved housing bodies, you know, in the country with a wealth of experience and you know, and capacity that's built up over years. So that's what we would hope to do.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, partnering and getting that knowledge. Brilliant. That kind of leads on to the next one, the next question from me, which I just think is great as well. Is there any specialized supports currently available to provide advice to LGBT tenants who are facing housing issues? I don't know if, I mean, again, I don't know if Threshold might have maybe
yeah, I'm not sure either. I do know that, you know, a couple of people have said to me recently that there is an identifiable one, but LGBT Ireland, you know, do a lot of work, you know, a lot of great work in providing advice and support, and they might be someone who'd be able to point someone in the right direction. And then there's you know, the I can't remember the name, the residents union. Renters union that's set up. CATU.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just blanked on the name, but I know that they've done a lot of work lately around supporting LGBT people who are facing evictions. Now it's based on regions, so it depends on where it is, but it's no harm in you know, if it's a particular issue that someone wants to get advice around. But basically, every organization that is registered and funded and everything in Ireland has to be inclusive and has to treat everyone equally. So if it's a case that someone is facing an eviction or facing issues in particular around their housing, that's actually illegal. It's just that I suppose, and when I talk about, people's vulnerabilities and everything, it is illegal to discriminate against someone on the basis of their gender or their gender identity, their actual gender, sexuality, etc., etc. But the fact of the matter is that people can feel vulnerable, and sometimes those kinds of discriminations can be hard to pinpoint and hard to name or prove maybe. But it is important to remember it if someone is feeling under threat in some way. Based on that, there are avenues that they can look in, and they can approach any like threshold or any of those who should be able to give them advice.
Yeah, and it would be great to have somebody there who really understands the complexity of the issue, right, and the complexity of the need. Yeah, and I think in most housing services, it's fair to say, like, and a lot of services in general, they're just kind of maybe underfunded, overstretched, and it's about creating that space in those roles, like you were discussing earlier, I suppose. Some other questions. I know somebody, Sean, put in a queer housing cooperative in Amsterdam that just started construction. So that's a really interesting project. I just recommend people having a look at that after the chat. And I know Bree just said, this sounds great. And how is it going to happen? That's the work in progress.
It is. That's a challenge, I suppose, really. But in actual fact, looking into it, it isn't impossible either. And like Sean was saying, there's one there in Amsterdam, but also it's kind of like what we want to do is we want to we're looking for funding at the moment to do a feasibility study. And another thing that came out in the public meeting that we had, and I think it was Owen from your organization that pointed out too, is that there is a provision in the most recent Housing Finance Act for local authorities to support community housing, whether that's cooperatives or community land trusts. So it's kind of like, I think, as a society and government as well is starting to recognize that there is a need to explore, some alternative options and to look at some, trying out different things. So there is an openness to look at cooperatives, being one model to provide housing and, community-led housing. And there's an awful lot more talk about community-led housing as well, because we know, well, in some respects, the big providers who are doing that for profit are building a lot, and it's not a case that they're nothing is happening. There is a lot of work going on, but I think for all of us as a community, if rather than keeping saying about they should do this and they should do that, we need to know what we want, and we need to know what we're asking for as well. Well, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. Dave Maynor put his hand up, so I'm going to find you if you want to unmute yourself, Dave.
Thank you for that, Michaela. I know I'm getting to the end of the call, but I just wanted to make an offer, really. You mentioned, Eileen, about the potential for partnering and collaborating with an approved housing body. I definitely think it's worth a further conversation. So perhaps if we could touch base, Michaela, I don't know if you could give Eileen my contact details, really.
Yeah,
I'll do it now. Yeah, that'd be fabulous.
Just to progress the conversation, really, and see what the potential is there for us to provide any support that might be useful to you.
Yeah, no, that'd be brilliant. Absolutely, because it's an ongoing struggle, but we're working away at it all the time. So
brilliant. Okay, brilliant. Look forward to that.
That's brilliant. Thanks a million,
Dave. Yeah, so I'll send them on after our call. And thank you both again. If there are no further questions, thanks again for coming along and having a chat. I found it really informative and interesting, and I'm excited for the future communities in Dublin. Fingers crossed. I don't know if there's anything else anyone would like to add, or Anna, if there's anything.
I just think it's an exciting, ambitious and brilliant project. And I just admire Eileen and the team for kind of moving it forward. And it's like, to keep the momentum going, I think, is challenging at times because there's so much to consider. But if anyone can volunteer and add any expertise or any level of being a volunteer, they should do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the links are in the chat for people who are interested in volunteering. And then, yeah, we will be posting to our socials, you know, kind of clips of today if you want to share them. And then, yeah, links to Aisteach's website as well. Yeah, thank you so much, Eileen and Anna.
And I'd just like to say to yourself, Michaela, and Co-operative Housing Ireland, thanks for asking us, because it's, you know, it's really good to start this conversation across the board. And, you know, it's Pride season now, so, you know, hopefully this just gets the ball rolling and more of these conversations happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, gets people thinking about what kind of communities and inclusive communities they want to live in and build together. Absolutely. Yeah, so some comments coming in. So Pierre says, thanks very much, very informative. And Liz saying, wish we could take this over to the West. That's the next step, Liz. Once the pilot project is done, that'd be great. Cool. And yeah, and Kate was saying as well, if you have any questions, you can also email us. So that's communications@cooperativehousing.ie. And then yeah, she's popped in Aisteach's link as well. Again, thanks so much, and happy Pride from Barbara.
Yeah, happy Pride to everyone.
Happy Pride, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.